So you're probably wondering why we're here. Why is Deloitte here in front of us to talk about frogs? This is an enterprise agility conference after all, right? Unless, that is, you read the abstract of the speech, which of course is full of spoilers and you already know the answer. But we're here to talk about sustainable decision making, and I'll bring up the frogs a little bit later. But first, let's talk about what is the urgency for tough decision making by the CIO and the CDO or the CTO, etc. First, let's look a bit at the energy forecast. So if you look over the last 10, 12 years, you can see it's building, but it's building at a pretty even pace, right, until about 2020. And you start to notice a little bit of an uptick on the end there. Now, we were at about 50% pace between 2010 and 2020. How much do you think it will be in the next 10 years? Will it be 50%? Looks like it'll be a little bit more, right? Will it be 100? Actually, it's way more than that. It's nearly 300%. So you can see this has really jumped off the page there. And what's the reason for that? There's many reasons for that. But one of the things is around the use of mobile, the use of cloud. So I was rewatching the old show Seinfeld recently. I don't know if you guys like that show, but I was watching a lot of the episodes and I noticed this entire plot of this whole episode would have been, it doesn't exist today because like there's one where Kramer just drives around for the whole episode not being able to find something. Doesn't exist, right? There's one where they sit and they wait in the restaurant waiting for someone to show up whether or not they're going to come, right? You just text somebody now, right? All of these things don't exist because basically everything we know about the world exists in our pocket today. And that's enabled by all of the towers and stuff we have. So if you think about, most of us have recently updated from a 4G phone to a 5G phone. Now, 5G phones, the towers, use about twice as much electricity as a 4G phone. And because of the way 5G phones work at a higher frequency, you actually have to have more of them installed on the physical presence. So we now have something that the towers take up twice as much electricity, and then you have to have much more density. That's why that use goes up. And then if you think about as well, not all that processing is done on your phone, right? Most of that is done in the cloud. So all of that enablement that we have has to be powered in the cloud in the back. And that's why these things are taking off, even though, as you can see, the blue band, consumer devices, is actually shrinking a little bit because we're actually making the devices more efficient, but the demand is getting huge. So that brings us to the frogs. So 5 frogs are sitting on a log. 3 decide to jump off. How many are left? The answer to that is 5, because deciding to do something and actually doing it, 2 different things. For instance, I've decided recently I'm going to work out more, I'm going to lose some weight. Decided that a few times recently. Haven't quite gotten to that. I'm going to do it today, and I'll see you all at the drinks after. But what makes jumping off the log hard? It's not an easy thing to do. There's 3 things that we've identified because we only have 20 minutes to talk to you about this. Could go on for all day, right? One of them, information overload. Another is long-term versus short-term. And the other is accountability. Now I'll talk a little bit about information overload. So too much or too little data make effective data-driven decisions. So if you think, so I used to be an infrastructure admin years ago, and we used to quite frequently have, one of the common issues was servers would run out of space. And we'd have to go in the server, we'd have to dig through, oh, we don't need these logs, oh, these files are old, we don't need them. And that would take hours, but we'd be really excited after, all right, we finally figured it out, cleared it out. But then after years with cloud and virtualization and the cost of storage going down so much, what do? Oh, it's out of space? Slap some more space on it. Give it another 100 gigs, no problem. And this has happened across all kinds of businesses. There are so many redundant copies of data. Like I've worked with a client recently that facilities and HR had 2 copies of the same data, which is, here are the locations that we have for our offices. Completely different data. Why? Because HR's data came from 2 years ago from facilities, merged, HR updated theirs one way, facilities updated theirs one way, you got 2 copies of the same thing. And this is just one example of like a microcosm of things that go on and on. So how do we make effective data decisions? First of all, about 10 years ago, most people started to create these like data science teams. So they got, big data was the big thing. They would put it all in a data warehouse, or they would put it all in a data lake, start to consume it. The problem with that is there's only so many things that these data teams can deal with, right, at one given time. So there are millions of decisions that are being made every day around all kinds of things, and a lot of them are related to sustainability. So what do we need to do to make that effective decision? We need to be more agile with those decisions. So take the information, distill it properly, and then put it in the hands of people who are making the decisions on the front line every day. So an example of that is the tool we've been talking about here at Deloitte at the booth called Carbon Now. So with Carbon Now, we've built this on top of ServiceNow, on top of the CMDB, which is the register that controls or contains all of the physical things in your IT environment. So what it does is it adds a carbon element to all of those things in the CMDB. So it allows you to enumerate, this is what my IT landscape looks like. And then add the carbon data to it, and you can see your footprint and what it takes you to get to net zero. So then you can start to think about what happens if I move to the cloud? What happens if I decide to push my laptop refreshes out for a year? What happens if I switch from laptops to Chromebooks? You can see how that affects all of your different decisions. Now, I'm going to talk or hand over to my colleague here, Tessa, who's going to talk a little bit about the other two.
Exactly. So besides data overload and info overload, as Larry just spoke about, there's another reason why it's hard for our folks to get off the log. So on the path to net zero, a lot of tough decisions need to be made. And one of the reasons why these decisions are tough is because of the trade-off that needs to be made. A trade-off, as you can see at the top of the screen as well, is between short-term financial business value, right? And our leaders are more and more pressured to take those decisions really fast. But at the same time, while we are becoming more and more aware of the impact of these decisions, we also look at the future generations. We all care also, at the same time, about those future generations to come, right? There are several, and we know that decisions that we are making today have a huge impact. Some of them have major consequences for the generations to follow. So if we were to put ourselves into the shoes of those decision makers and think of that dilemma and what it feels like, there is a little visualization what we can do. So let's assume, for a second, the UN just came out with data. This year, the global population on Earth alive, we are with 8 billion people. Now, if I ask you to go 50,000 years back in time, what do you guess is the size of the ancestors that lived before us in the last 50,000 years? Take a guess. What could it be? Is it like 50 billion? Is it 80 billion? 100 billion? Let's have a look. Our ancestors take the size, if we go back 50,000 years in time, 100 billion. So that's actually a sheer size. But now, let's do the same exercise and think 50,000 years ahead. Just imagine the size of the bubble that might appear on screen. Again, let's take a guess. How much could it be, potentially? Anyone? Shout out. Any guess?
300 billion?
3 trillion, I hear. Could it be 4? Maybe 5? Well, here we go. This is an estimation, right? We don't know for sure. But let's assume 50,000 years. We're calculating with the approx growth per century, and we calculate with UN data that we have available. Today, where we grow at 135 million per century, then this is approximately the number that we end up with. But actually, I'm not here to talk about whether these facts are correct. It's just to give you an idea of the sheer size of the unborn generations and of the impact that we have with decisions that we make today about our profit, our planet, and our people to come. So what do we see some organizations do? Because we're talking about decision making. So some organizations have adopted the 7-generation principle. Maybe some of you have heard this. It's nothing new. It's nothing that Larry or I made up. This comes all the way back from the Native Americans. And what they do is, if they have crucial decisions to make, decisions that they know will impact future generations to come, they invite, they invite representatives in their community to act as if they are belonging to the unborn, one of the unborn generations to come. This is a principle that helps to invite those who do not yet have a voice in decision-making today, right? We can make them heard. And again, if we apply that practice, we assume a lot because we have no idea, right, what the planet is going to look like. But actually, by inviting these voices onto our tables and involve them in participation in our decision-making today, we create a more holistic perspective, a more systemic perspective. And we try, at least, this is an intent, we try to listen to the future voices that will be alive, right? This helps leaders today in not only feeling rushed into making short-term decisions, but also had to consider that good ancestorship and to try and make an attempt and weigh in those interests and needs that future generations will bring to our tables. So this, Larry very much spoke about a very technical perspective, but here we come to also the decision-making that is actually from the heart. This is actually an ethical dilemma as well that comes into the decision-making, and that makes it hard for our folks to get off the log. Let's look at one more reason why it is hard for our folks to get off the log. And here we come to enterprise agility. Now, sustainability, nothing new, but is a huge topic, and it is very, very complex, right? So there's many angles and ways to go about it. But where to start? We see a lot of organizations that appoint a chief sustainability officer, and before we know it, we also have a lot of a sustainability committee, and we start making defining targets, setting priorities, and we see a lot of initiatives ongoing. That is all great, right? That is we're off on a good start. But how do we know if that's enough to get the right things done in time? That's the question. Now, as sustainability is such a complex and vast issue, we believe that's also something that resonates with the enterprise agility community, right? This is where enterprise agility actually is at its best, when it's hugely complex, when we have to find ways to solutions and outcomes in incremental steps. That's why we're very keen that we can be here, reaching out today and connect with you and see what your thoughts are. We have a lot of thoughts on how we believe that enterprise agility principles and good practices and mindset will actually help organizations, can help organizations to accelerate on the path to net zero. I can talk to you all day about these, but let's just look at 4 things, right? So the first thing that enterprise agility can do is actually bring focus to make sure that you target and that you start from tackling the biggest issues first, maybe the biggest complex issues first. All of you, those who are enterprise agility practitioners, you bring that experience, right? Where we think holistically, we start big, we prioritize, break things up in smaller things, start learning quickly through experimentation. That's one. And then the second thing is that bringing that focus on outcomes. We've heard it already before, right? Sustainability outcomes. And sustainability outcomes can go all sorts of ways. Larry raised tackling the carbon emission, but it can also be pollution if that is the highest thing in your supply chain that requires attention. Or it can be waste management that needs to be addressed in other areas. With Larry, we spoke about IT and emission rights, right? There's all sorts of places where we can look, but based on the place where we can find it, we can prioritize what is the issue that needs tackling first, define outcomes, and then embark on that path of continuous improvement, right? Getting into the flow, getting the sustainability topics and outcomes through OKR into the flow of continuous improvement efforts in organizations, right? But last but not least, that is also what we've heard today a lot. Enterprise agility, that's at least what we believe, has great chances and is very promising to create a sense of shared leadership. Instead of having that accountability with your sustainability officer and that sustainability committee, how about we as enterprise agilists, right, embark on these organizations and make sure that we all know, we've done this for decades, distribute leadership, right? Shared decision-making, bring it down in the organization to team levels. That's how we can bring about shared ownership for outcomes on the path to net zero. And that's how we believe that actually enterprise agility has a lot to promise if it comes to helping organizations to accelerate on that path to net positive. We are very keen to discuss this in further detail with you today because we love to hear your ideas. I just shared 4, and there's many more. That's the good news.
Thanks, Tessa. So, as we mentioned, the cost of people not making decisions fast enough is huge, harming our planet and our future. You saw, we always think about maybe today, the people, ourselves making decisions. We always think about our kids, but that number of people coming is huge. We really need to make those decisions for them. So as I mentioned, we must have to make faster decision making. Sometimes it won't always be perfect, but we move, we learn, we adjust quickly. Insights are really important. So we need to take all that data we have, distill it into something important. So if you think about how much data is produced, there's a stat that I saw a few years ago, about 90% of the data that exists today was created in the last 2 years. And tracking every few years, that number seems to stay pretty static. And it's because even though there's so much data that's been created, we still manage to outdo ourselves every year. To give you an example, there's 100 billion WhatsApp messages that are sent every single day, and only about half of those are from my mom asking for a picture of the kids. Long-term versus short-term, as we mentioned, we need to get moving, we need to act, but we can't ignore what's coming in the future, right? So we need to make sure that we're thinking about the next generation and generations after that when we make these decisions. But it doesn't mean we can't make decisions quick, right? We can deal with tactical things while we deal with the long-term strategic things at the same time. So systems thinking. We do need to bring all of this stuff together. We need to work together. We need to work with each other. But we also do need to make sure that we put those decisions into the hands of the people who have the most information, who are there working on the ground. Accountability is extremely important. So was speaking to someone at the booth earlier, talking about why some of this is so hard when it comes to sustainability. And the answer is because we don't really have a target. So if you think about taxes, right? The government prints a guide and says, this is how you have to pay taxes every year. And then people can read through it, work with lawyers and consultants, all that, and make sure they pay their taxes right. But there's no answer. No one's published, okay, this is the one way we're all going to go together to fix this. So because of that, we have to take our own individual accountability. How we do that at every organization is a little bit different, but we need to make sure that we put those decisions into the hands of people who can make them. And that's enabled from above, really. And then, of course, there's plenty of ethical dilemmas. Lots of externalities. I make a decision here, it affects there. We need to make sure that we track what we're doing and think about all the possible effects, but we can't make those possible effects stop us from making the decisions. And that is one thing that I think happens a lot right now, is that people just look at all of the different things that could happen and say, well, if I'm the one who makes a decision to do something, it might cause some other problem, and then my name is on that. We need to think about, having accountability, but also having learning, enabling people to make decisions, enabling kind of those guilt-free post-mortem kind of things when we realize something is not working. So that's really it. The question is, what are you waiting for? So come and speak to us at the booth. We are really excited to talk to you all about this, and I'm excited to hear more from the next presenters. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.